In the spirit of getting our hands in and dirty and learning, we're gonna just build a GUI by playing with it. It's important skill for a programmer just sometimes to just tinker, and I don't mean TK enter here, but I mean tinker as and just play with something and see how it works. And GUI is a very excellent way to do that because it's a very visual medium. So here's our basic GUI app here. So I mean, if you look at it, it's underneath the GUI folder inside of the Learning Python, the basic GUI here. It's inside the basic folder because there's a couple other resources that we're going to take advantage of here. But I just want to build something and kind of decide what I'm building a little bit on the fly and just kind of use some pieces. And we're going to do this in multiple parts. So let me just start by running it. So this is the window that shows up. You can see TK is the name of the window up here. It's, the TK window that pops up, and it comes from our window over here. So we created this window. The window's a variable name. I gave it. And TK is the class that we imported from TK enter. I also imported message box show info here because we're going to use that later on. But those I did for you, so you don't have to worry about where they come from. But this is where everything is coming from, including TK and the stuff we're going to throw on it. We got the standard ledger stuff here going on, but besides for that, there's nothing going on. So this sets up the window, and this makes the window show up. Main loop is what makes the window show up. So let's add something to our window, right? So let's I don't know, just add a label to our window. So let's call it let's be encouraging here. Go fight, win, be a strong coder. We're gonna do a cheer label here, and we're gonna say that's gonna be a new label. Now, how do I know it's a label? Well, in the previous slides, I saw a label on there, or I can Google this, or I can find it in the book. Whatever resource you use to pop this notion in your head is totally fine. There's no wrong answer to that, and we can see once we get inside of here and we know it's called a label, there's actually some helper from idle that says, okay, well, master is equal to none and some other stuff. That actually didn't help us all that much. But what does that mean, master? None is the default. Well, this is saying, well, what component does this live on? This lives on that window. And you can actually put labels inside other components, as we'll see later on. But we're going to say this lives in the window right here. And it has other attributes, one of which is the text, which is, let's just say, uh, your message. No, let me say, yay, Python. Yeah, there you go. Be a little more specific. So we're going to give some cheer like, yay, Python, or you're a great coder, or whatever you want to say right there. All right, so how do we put this onto the display? Well, we can say window dot, I'm sorry, not window, cheer label dot pack. So real simple command right there, which is saying, okay, take this label right here and toss it onto that window and just pack it in there. So yay, Python. So now you can see our window became very, very small because that's the only thing that's on it, but I can make it big. But I've now taken a label, I've tossed it onto my window. Now, not super interesting, not the greatest thing in the world, and that's really not what labels are for. What would be much better is to have some sort of dynamic interface to allow a person to put in their own item. So let's see, let's say this is your cheer right there. All right. So we can say the cheer input, whatever you want it to have inside here, is what? Well, is it a text box? Is it like, what is it? What's it called? Again, we can search it. I'm not going to go through the process of that. Well, I mean, I guess I could. I can bring up a new tab here and I can say TK enter text box. That's what I normally look for. Python TK enter. Again, I could go to this one. I've obviously been there before. There's a text widget. So that's a thing, but it's not actually the one we're looking for. So this is where you have to kind of know terms, and that's where it's useful to have looked at a little bit. Actually, what we're going to do here is an entry. It's just a single text entry. We'll come back to the text box in a second, but we're going to do that, and the entry is part of the window. That's where we're going to get started with this, and then we also can set optional things like how big it's going to be, but we're not going to worry about that for now. And if I go through and run this, let's notice nothing shows up, just the cheer. Well, why? Because just because I paint a picture doesn't mean it's hanging on the wall. I have to explicitly hang it on the wall. So I have to say cheer input.pack, for example. And once I do that, then you can see there's my input. So the cheer and the input. Now that's a terrible layout. Why would you do that? Like, why would you put one on top of the other? Well, it's just the way pack works. You can pack in a variety of different ways, actually. You can pack left to right and up to down or whatever, but the default is top to bottom. Because typically that's the way you actually put stuff on a screen. You put one line and you hit enter, and you put the next line, and so on. So this is a perfectly acceptable behavior. I just need to understand it and build it the way I want to build it. So let's not deal with a pack here, but let's do it slightly differently. The other way of doing this is to put it on a grid instead. So I can change pack to grid. So if I do this by itself, it's not going to be happy. Okay, it's did the exact same thing. It's not a grid, but you notice it doesn't move around. It's top left, but it doesn't actually do the thing I want to, because by default the grid just puts the thing on a row of its own. So the way grid is supposed to work is you tell it, I want to know, well, what row does it go on? And so this is the first row, so row 0. And then what column does it go into? And this is, we'll say, the first column, so that's also 0. And if we want this to be on the same row, I say this one is row 0. And this one, I'm going to say the column is 1. So again, in our mind, if I wanted to draw this out, which is a useful thing to do, let me make this bigger. What we're doing here is we're creating rows and columns, so the grid like that. So again, we're not building all of this, but we're saying is we want the text to go in this spot right here, and then the text box to go in this spot right here. 0 row, 0 column, 0 row, 1 column, and we can keep putting things down from there, and that's what we'll do in a bit. But that's, this is the idea of what we have going on. So let's check out and see what happens here. Excellent. Your cheer. And now we have the row and the column. Now, if I resize this, you can see it stays and it looks like a nice little typical GUI I want to. So let's do one other thing while we're here before we go any further, because if we do this, we want to do something with that. So we want to have a submit button. I'm going to give it a good name instead of just calling it a button. It's a submit button. There might be multiple buttons on the screen, and that is a button, right? And so what display does it go on? That's always the first question. What goes on the window? And then what's the text I want on the button? Well, I can say cheer. I'd be excited about it. Put an exclamation point on that. And so then we can take that button and then we can say submit button dot grid, and our row is going to be 1. Our column can either be 0 or 1. We'll put it in 0, and let's look at what that looks like real quick. So we have a button on the left, or we can put it in column 1 and have a button on the right, or we can do column span 2 at location 0. So what this is going to do, it's going to bridge the 2 columns, and it centers it between the 2 of them. So that is a very, very simple, quick and easy way to just tinker, right? We put a text on there, we put uh, a label on there, we put a button on there, and we played with these different managers, pack and the grid specifically to be able to get a good feel for how these basics work. So again, we're 10 minutes in. We don't have much, but we have something. We have some understanding. So let's expand that here. The next thing we should do probably is make this button work. So make sure you get this tiny little bit working, and then let's come back and make the button work next.